Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the James City County Planning Commission. It's January 4th, 2023 at 6 p.m., so Happy New Year. And Mr. Holt, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Mr. Rogers represents the Berkeley District. Ms. Knoll.
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is vice chair to the commission. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp.
Here.
Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member and is chair of the Planning Commission. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. Sitting to my left this evening is Miss Liz Parman, our Deputy County Attorney. It's my pleasure to serve as Secretary to the Commission. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Appreciate it. First item on our agenda this evening is our public comment period. This is the time for those who are attending who wish to make comments regarding anything for the Planning Commission other than those items that are scheduled for a public hearing this evening. So is there anybody that wishes to make comment at this time? Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to reports of the commission. There was no DRC meeting for the month of December, so that leaves us with policy. Mr. Haldeman.
Thank you. Mr. Polster called the meeting to order at 4 p.m. with Messrs. Kropf and O'Connor also present. Also present were Andrea Case, Ellen Cook, Josh Crump, Liz Parman, Christy Parrish, Jose Ribeiro, Thomas Wysong, and Suzanne Yates from the county planning staff. The three committee members in attendance voted unanimously to permit Mr. Haldeman to attend by telephone, which he then did. The committee considered a Board of Supervisors resolution to consider possible amendments regarding community recreation facilities in residential districts. County Planner Ms. Yates reported that community recreation facilities are permitted use in all residential districts except R8 and A1, which require special use permits. Some such facilities are reportedly being used by groups and teams not affiliated with the neighborhood, and as such might cause excess traffic, noise, lighting, and unwelcome effects not commonly found in those neighborhoods. In response, staff recommended amending the use list for residential and mixed-use districts to require a special use permit when certain community recreation facilities incur recurring use by teams, organizations, or other entities who are not primarily residents of the neighborhood within which the facility is located. After some discussion, the policy committee determined that they lacked sufficient information to make a recommendation. The committee asked staff to investigate further and to determine, number one, how widespread is the problem, how many complaints have been received, are HOAs handling the problem? Number two, how would the new ordinance be enforced? Number three, what specific activities would be covered or excluded? Sports, weddings, card games, etc. Number four, what conditions would apply to the SUP? And number five, are there other ways to handle this problem if it is a problem? Further consideration will be given to this matter at the next policy committee meeting on January 12th, 2023. The meeting was adjourned at 4:42 p.m. Any questions? Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. Next item this evening is the consent agenda. The only item we have on that is minutes of the December 7th, 2022 regular meeting. Mr. Haldeman had sent some comments earlier that were amended into these minutes. So any other questions, corrections, or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
So we have a motion to approve. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Our first public hearing this evening, SUP-22-0022, 4711 Rochambeau Drive Tourist Home. Ms. Costello, good evening. Thanks for pinch hitting tonight.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. Mr. Stuart Burcham, property owner, has applied for a special use permit to allow for the short-term rental of a 3-bedroom single-family home located at 4711 Rochambeau Drive. The property is zoned A1 General Agricultural, designated rural lands on the Comprehensive Plan land use map, and is located outside the primary service area. The property is served by private well and private sewer. If granted, this SUP would allow for short-term rentals throughout the year. No changes to the footprint of the home are proposed. Staff finds favorable factors for this application include the presence of adequate off-street parking, the location of the property is along a major road, and the applicant has stated that he will obtain the proper licensing and inspections for this change of use. Staff finds the proposed use will not negatively impact surrounding property or development, nor is it expected to negatively impact levels of service for roads and other public services. While staff believes the location is generally considered appropriate for this use, staff finds that the proposal is not fully consistent with the adopted 2045 Comprehensive Plan recommendations for short-term rentals. Therefore, staff is unable to recommend approval of this application. Should the Planning Commission recommend approval of the application, staff has included proposed conditions for consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is also available. Thank you.
Costello. Any questions? Very much. This time I would like to open the public hearing, and if anybody wishes to speak on this application, please feel free to approach the podium. Please state your name and your address for the record, and we'll open that up. Seeing and hearing none, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion. Mr. Kropp?
Kick it off. Well, as you know, we all know that short-term rentals has been an issue that we have been struggling with for a long time, even after the comprehensive plan update established the 4 performance factors. It's still, in my opinion, it is not adequate to deal with the types of applications that we're seeing now. In my opinion, the intent of the performance factors were geared to protecting residentially zoned districts to prevent neighborhoods from deteriorating or one house turning over to a short-term rental and then another neighbor saying, well, I'm going to do the same, and have it turn into a transient location. And I understand all that for the residentially zoned area, but looking at the location, I drove by both of our cases tonight, and looking at the location, for one thing, it is absolutely nowhere near a residential community, or not reasonably near a residential community, but also even though the owner would not be living on the property while it was being used as a short-term rental, the owner's daughter works in Williamsburg, I think it says 6 days a week, and would be there to greet new arrivals and so on and so forth. So in my mind, while the owner is not physically residing on the property, a family member is in town 5 days a week and lives 26 miles away. And so to me, this sort of provides the safeguard that would ensure that there is an owner that is nearby and able to respond to any issues. So, you know, for those reasons, I feel in this particular case that I would support the application.
Mr. Kropp? Mr. Haldeman?
I too plan to support it, but we've made a number of exceptions to the owner not living on the property. We're constantly reminded that SUPs are forever and that this property will turn over someday and that the daughter won't be there someday. Maybe it'll be 20 years from now, 30 years, whatever. And this will still be a tourist home with no one living, with the owner, without the owner having to live in it. And I've voted for tourist homes like this in the past, which is why I've kind of accepted this one, but we've made enough exceptions of this that I'm starting to wonder if we shouldn't change the policy or revisit the policy somehow. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I agree. It's well buffered. I don't expect this to cause any discomfort for any of the neighboring homes or anything. So,
Mr. Bolster?
I don't disagree at all with what Mr. Kraft and Mr. Holloman has said, but Jack's point is the real sticking point still with me, and that is that these are in perpetuity. And, you know, we've talked about this, I don't know how many times, and there is one school of thought out of the county attorney's office that maybe at some point that'll change in the legislature. On the other hand, we know that there are counties within the state, the Commonwealth, that in fact do put a condition that limits the SUP to those residents. I don't know if we're ready to take that step, but I still feel really uncomfortable about this for the very reason that we've talked about being in perpetuity. I mean, I understand about all the rest of it, but I am not so concerned about what's going to happen with this resident and this owner. But I am concerned from a land use point of view on what the implications are for the future. And I'll bring up the same point when we look at the next one. And so I'd like us to at least come to grips with the Board of Supervisors on this issue, that in fact they could ask the county attorney to look at putting a condition so that when we get one of these like this, there is an SUP condition that limits the SUP to the current owners only and not to extend into the future. And that is something that I would like to hear us discuss when we get to that point in our agenda and how you all feel about that. But we're going to continue to see this issue, and it's going to continue to stumble over the very point that we're talking about for it. And so somehow or another, the county's got to move off the dime. And if other counties can limit this and put this condition, why can't we? That's all.
Comments?
In the past, we have brought up these applications and have talked about removing properties that could have been rented to workforce people that can't afford housing and so forth. And I think Frank has brought it up before that we'd be removing a piece of property that could be rented full-time for something that could be vacant 90% of the time or be full all the time. So I'm thinking it's a nice little house. I drove out there, I looked at it, I'm thinking if I owned it, I would rent it out full-time. I wouldn't go through all this rigmarole that you go through with Airbnb and VRBO. That's just my personal opinion.
I share Mr. Polster's concern, because for me, it's not just use. I mean, we're not defining this as a tourist home. We're defining this as short-term rentals. So that means that it doesn't have to be a tourist home. It could be some sort of transient use, you know, constantly and consistently, and I think that really seems to be our stumbling block. So I won't put Ms. Parman on the spot tonight, because I know that it's Mr. Kinsman's opinion that the code doesn't allow for sunset, and it's other county attorneys who interpret the code differently, and certainly, you know, it's ultimately, I think, up to the state legislature to say it's permissible or not permissible, and or the courts, one of the two. And you know, I don't know that we want to go to that expense. So I recognize it continues to be a challenge, and for me, the challenge has always been, you know, removing what could be affordable housing stock out of the community, and really that it just boils down to transient uses, regardless of what the vehicle is to get there. So,
just a couple of follow-up points in terms of I agree about the affordable housing stock. I think in this case, it does sound like the owners are living there, and that the weekends they're not there, they'll consider renting it out. So maybe it wouldn't necessarily. But I also want to reiterate Frank's point, because I think it's really important. We have these standards, one of them being that the owner has to live on the property. And we've repeatedly made exceptions because, well, it seems like it kind of fits the spirit of that suggestion. And I like Frank's suggestion that we revisit some of these standards, and either we adopt standards that we stick to, or we don't, and we just kind of use the standards as a guideline and continue to make decisions. And I agree that in this case, it's similar to other cases that we've approved, and just open the door for us to be pretty flexible in terms of how we make decisions about these homes.
Mr. Rogers?
The only point I would make is that my reading of the comprehensive plan, and it's wonderful, and it took a ton of work, and thank you all, so I don't mean to sound dismissive because I didn't work on it, but I still believe it's an aspirational document. It's not a regulatory set of preconditions, and therefore I think it's perfectly normal and natural that we would examine each case in its own unique set of circumstances. So the way I see this particular case is a couple who intends to keep this house. They're not at all entertaining the idea of, as far as we know, is marketing it for workforce housing. And so therefore I don't have an issue in looking at these 4 bullets as things that are important factors to consider, but I don't see any of them, including the one about the owner being in the dwelling as a line in the sand. So at least for me, I will support this application.
I think the challenge for some is the fact that, you know, the SUP runs with the land, so nothing precludes that owner from putting the house on the market tomorrow and saying, I've got an SUP, I've got a great tourist home you can buy, and one of these corporate ownerships could come in and take ownership of it. And I think that's where, at least I'm not going to speak for Mr. Polster, but I think that's where I know I struggle, and I think he probably does as well, so.
Right, and I would agree with Steve that the document's aspirational and the standards are aspirational, and I think that's where we get into trouble, okay? And that's why I really want to revisit on this issue, and it's up to the board to decide what they want to do. They want to continue it to be aspirational, or they want to put it into an ordinance, which would make it more regulatory. That's their decision, but we're going to continue to see this issue, and we're going to see it again this evening. I just want some resolution, or at least a path to the resolution of it, or a decision on the part of the board says, nope, we don't care about that. We're going to stick with what we have. And that's fine with me, because they're the final deciders. So if that's what they want to do, that's great. Then I won't struggle with this every time.
I'll entertain a motion if anybody wants to make one.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval for SUP-22-0022 4711 Rochambeau Drive Tourist Home.
Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. So, Mr. Holt, there's a motion to approve.
Mr. Alderman, to clarify for purposes of the minutes and the motion, does that include with the proposed conditions?
With conditions, yes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Kropf,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Mr. Polster,
No.
Mr. Rose,
Aye.
Ms. Null,
No,
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
and Mr. O'Connor.
No.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Very much. Our next case this evening is SUP-22-0023 2878 Monticello Avenue Tourist Home. Ms. Costello, it's you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jeffrey Russett has applied for a special use permit to allow for the short-term rental of a 3-bedroom, single-family home at 2878 Monticello Ave. The property is zoned A1 General Agricultural designated rural lands on the comprehensive plan land use map and is located outside the primary service area. The property is served by private well and septic. If granted, this SUP would allow for short-term rentals throughout the year. No changes to the footprint of the home are proposed. Staff finds some favorable factors for this application, such as there being adequate off-street parking, the size of the lot and the existing vegetation providing screening and buffering to most adjacent properties, and that the applicant has stated that they will obtain the proper licensing and inspections. Staff also finds the proposed use will not negatively impact surrounding property or development, nor is it expected to negatively impact levels of service for roads and other public services. While staff believes the location is generally considered appropriate for this use, staff finds that the proposal is not fully consistent with the adopted 2045 Comprehensive Plan recommendations for short-term rentals, since one of the 4 development standards, the property owner living on the property during its use as a tourist home, is not met. Therefore, staff is unable to recommend approval of this application. Should the Planning Commission recommend approval of the application, staff has included proposed conditions for consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is also available. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Costello? I just have one. There's an approved master plan on this now, correct, for its operation?
For the tourist home,
No, isn't this the one with the kennel? And
there's kennels. It
so
was approved in 2003.
There's an approved master plan for that. And so does this require a change in approval for a master plan, or is it just the SUP then?
Separate SUP, because each SUP is specific to that use.
Okay. All right, thanks. So, any other questions for staff? Thank you. At this point, I would like to open the public hearing and invite the applicant up to speak, or anybody else who wishes to speak.
My name is Jimmy Edwards. I own the property immediately adjacent to the proposed tourist home. Well, I have another Airbnb that is on the other side of my property, and the safety concerns me. Last year, a man and his toddler who was walking, and a baby in a stroller were coming down my driveway during hunting season. They were standing about 20 foot past the no trespassing sign. That's dangerous. People will shoot at a flash of white if they see it out there. A couple weeks ago, my daughter and I were leaving, going out somewhere. There was a man from the Airbnb standing over my property, right by that sign again, and I asked him what was he doing, and he said, "Oh, just looking around." I said, "Well, you are trespassing, and it is hunting season. There are people out here with guns." I said, "It is not safe." So he left. Now, there's 2 cases where this sign didn't make a bit of difference. Yesterday, I drove past a property there, and I looked over. There used to be a fence between the 2 properties that's collapsed. What is going to keep people who are not accustomed to being in a rural setting from saying, "Oh, I can walk through here"? There's no way that it can be done safely. It impacts my property. I can't remember the exact date, but they have a pet resort on the same property. The wife of the owner came to my house and said, "We want to build a pet resort. It will be in a soundproof building." I said, "Well, I am concerned because I hunt out here, and your dogs will be disturbing my hunting." She said, "Oh no, you'll never hear a bark out of them. I hear it every time I go out of my house. They're not being kept in a soundproof building." They've already proven that they can do what they want to do on it. All I can do is ask you to stop them.
State your address, please.
136 Sawmill Road. And if you look at it, I'm immediately adjacent to their property up there, just on the side of it.
Left or the right?
Directly above it,
Directly
by
above
that
it?
picture there, that property is mine.
In the back.
I have friends that occasionally come over to hunt. Very careful. We're all careful. But nobody wants to see anyone shot accidentally or injured in any other way.
Mr. Edwards? I just said thank you. So-
How you doing this evening? My name's Dion Pollock. I'm 2968 Monticello Avenue, and I'm the lot to the right, the road that drives down and touches the property on the corner there, where Jimmy's talking about the people come through. That's my lot. It goes up to Sawmill, down a little bit. There's a up. There's a road in between that goes up the correct. That is my land right there, and the R&B's right next door that Jimmy's talking about. Those people are constantly cutting through because that map doesn't depict it very well, but you can come off Sawmill and cut through Monticello Avenue. I maintain that 1.5 mile long road, and I'm constantly putting gravel down because people are cutting through, and there's off that where they built that R&B, the people are constantly coming onto the land, and I also hunt. But my big concern is the road and the way Google depicts it. People are constantly driving and lost out in that area. I purchased that land out in that area so I would be away from people, and it's getting to be where there's constantly people on my road. And like Jimmy said, signs do not stop it, people from going down that road. Those are my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Pollock. Yes, sir.
My name's Jeff Russett. I'm actually the owner of 2878 Monticello Avenue. So the road he's talking about for the kennel is actually a private road. It's not even connected to his road, so the traffic wouldn't even be affected. As far as the danger of the hunting and so forth, we have a very large kennel facility and traffic, multiple traffic in and out all day long. I've never even heard a gunshot back there or anything that he's talking about, or anybody have any concern whatsoever about hunting and so forth. Staff is there 7 days a week, so as far as the impact of meeting people and greeting people for the Airbnb, that would be part of our staff and everything. And my wife and I actually only live about 3 miles down the road in the meadows. So we would be meeting and greeting people as they come and go. I'm not sure if you have any other questions about concerns you would have anything to do with that property. I can't even see the neighbors' homes. That's how much woods there are between us.
Any questions for the applicant?
Drove down the road and I didn't see any, because I went out to look where you live, where you're asking, and I didn't see any signs that said private road, no trespassing, nothing on that road.
I don't have that on, that's not our road. He's
okay.
talking about a different road.
I thought you were talking, and then I got out to the big potholes and I turned around.
Yeah, I got those coming to get fixed in a few weeks, but the road he's talking about is actually on the other side, way up to the right. The road for us, there's just a neighbor next to us, and then another private little road that cuts off to the right and goes way up to the right corner, and that's a private driveway. We're the only ones on that road. I'm not sure what he's talking about. He's talking about his road, Sawmill Road, that's on the other side, way on the other side.
Any other questions for Mr. Russett? Thank you, Mr. Russett. Sir, we only allow one, so it's not a back and forth, so I'm sorry, but I appreciate your comments.
No, but he is correct. It is not Sawmill Road. It is a private road. But it actually.
Sir, we got it, so understood. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak on this application? Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and open it up for discussion. Mr. Polster?
Staff, clarify where this Airbnb is, that they were.
I'm not aware of any other Airbnbs in that area, and I'd have to do a little bit of research to see if we have any approved SUPs. I'm not sure.
Different issue. Mr. Crown?
Just, I won't repeat my comments from last go-around. I will reiterate that I agree with the comments that were made about asking for a special use permit, a time level for this sort of use. You know, maybe when the owner that receives the special use permit sells the property, then the new owner, if they want to continue that use, would have to reapply, something like that. Or if there's even such an item as a limited use permit as opposed to a special use permit, whereas a limited use permit maybe wouldn't convey in perpetuity, I don't know. So the only thing I will mention, though, is that this is a case where the ordinance is more generous than the comprehensive plan. The ordinance governing short-term rentals, if I remember correctly, does not impose any of these performance factors like residing on the parcel and so on. And then the other thing that I'll just point out is that the property owned by the applicant is 16 acres, whereas the SUP acreage is a little over 1 acre. So you've got a 16-acre parcel, and so to me, the potential to disrupt neighbors is minimal. And again, as in the previous case, I plan to support it, but I do recognize that I feel we really do need to address this issue of whether there's a sunset clause or not.
Mr. Polster?
I thought Mr. Haldeman brought up a great question when he asked it of staff, in that the property was A1 inside the PSA, and so therefore, at some point, the property could be subdivided into 3-acre lots for it. And so I'm back on my drum about these things being in perpetuity. So even though today it's not subdivided, it could be, and if it was, the Airbnb would be in the middle of a subdivision, or a minor subdivision, either way. And so that issue is just another reason why I really am troubled by this perpetuity issue for it. And I'm sure we're going to see some of this again in the future. But I thought Jack's point was exactly right. And that's what land use policy is about. Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
A quick one, right in on top of what Frank discussed, and I don't have all the paperwork open in front of me, but the house in question, doesn't it front onto Monticello? No. Okay, so where? Can somebody kind of show where it would end up?
It's like a mile back off Monticello.
That lime green, the lime green.
It's right here, see?
One's on the
It's all the
map
way back
can be faint. Okay, so I think there was some discussion earlier just to sort of orient you. So Sawmill Road is this piece here. It's hard to see with some of the gray lines and some of the aerial photography turned on. So it is within a platted right-of-way, but the platted right-of-way stops with the cul-de-sac bulb up here. And then there is a reference for sort of a cut-through road, but as you can see, at best, you know, that's going to be an old private road. There is no platted right-of-way that gets you from this cul-de-sac bulb here down to Monticello. So Monticello, of course, is going to be down at this location. The highlighted red area is all of the property in total. And so the house in question that's proposed for the Airbnb, or short-term rental rather, excuse me, is this one right here on the corner within this highlighted area. And that's the one that's highlighted on the master plan and included with the staff report. And so, you know, again, you can kind of faintly see where some of those, you know, sort of private roads kind of cut back through across these lots, but it's definitely not in a platted right-of-way once you get beyond this. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm not even sure any of this is a platted right-of-way. You know, these are going to be flag stems for these lots that get you out to Monticello. So it's, yeah, kind
Since you're right there,
of back up in the middle of the property, if you will.
Paul, can you, is there a way to tell where the new wedding venue is?
Yeah, that's going to be, so I think they own all of this property as well, but the building itself proper was constructed here, and then the new driveway that everybody sees is built within this flag stem right here that takes you out to John Tyler Highway. So it's going to be, you know, the ellipse or the circle is going to be right in here.
But it's already in Google Maps.
Update that.
Henley Road that goes up to, from Monticello up to his property, that's a state road? It's a
No, it's
road.
private,
Okay, got it.
to the best of my knowledge.
Any questions for Mr. Holt while he's standing there?
With a mouse, so I'm equally,
Thank you, Mr. Holt.
thank you.
Other comments? Dr. Rose?
Yeah, I think on the surface, this seems very similar to our last case and other cases where even though couldn't live on the property, there's enough employees here, as we have the one at the airport. But the other consideration is the impact on the neighbors in the neighborhood, and I recognize this isn't in the middle of a neighborhood, which I know is one of the considerations, but we've already heard from two neighbors about the impact that this could potentially have. And so if we can be flexible on all considerations, I think it's reasonable to be flexible on what that means to have an impact on the neighbors. And I can only take everyone who has spoken tonight at face value, and it does seem like in this case it would have an impact on the neighborhood. So in that case, that's going to be part of my consideration as I decide whether
I think for me, and, you know, I will gladly, I know Mr. Polster will make a comment at the next Board of Supervisors meeting, but I'll be glad to forward it along too. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we all agreed to during the comp plan is really those things that support agritourism and are in rural lands and those kinds of things. And this, for me, almost falls into that category, but I'm still struggling with, you know, what's that long-term impact of the short-term rentals. So, you know, probably stay pretty consistent and not supporting the application like somebody to make a motion or offer some other discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval of SUP 22-0023, Monticello Avenue short-term rental with conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Haldeman. Mr. Holt, we have a motion to approve. We did.
All right, we have a motion, and again, to clarify, that would be with conditions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Kropf,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Mr. Polster,
No.
Mr. Rose,
No.
Ms. Knoll,
No,
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
and Mr. O'Connor.
No.
Motion does not pass. So the way that this will go forward to the board at their meeting would be that a motion to recommend approval did not pass by a vote of 4-3.
Thank you very much. Our last public hearing this evening, SUP-22-0025, 7504 Richmond Road, Starbucks. Mr. Wysong, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to the Commission. Ms. Lauren Sweeney of Kimley Horn has applied for a special use permit to allow the operation of a coffee shop with drive-through that will generate more than 100 additional trips to and from the site during the peak hour of operation. This proposal is for the property addressed 7504 Richmond Road. This parcel is zoned B1 General Business with Proffers, is designated Community Commercial on the future land use map, and is located inside the primary service area. This proposal is for an adaptive reuse of the vacant bank with drive-through that is located on the parcel for the purpose of a coffee shop with drive-through. The adaptive reuse of vacant commercial buildings within the PSA is specifically recommended within the goal for the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan. Staff finds this proposal to be compatible with the surrounding development and consistent with the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. We do recommend that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this application subject to the proposed conditions. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and we do have Lauren here tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wysong. Any questions? Thank you very much. At this point, I will open the public hearing and entertain the applicant or any comments.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Lauren Sweeney, and I'm an engineer at Kimley Horn. My business address is 4525 Main Street, Suite 100, Virginia Beach, Virginia. As they said, the goal of this project is to convert this existing bank to a Starbucks with a drive-through and a patio. We intend to minimize land disturbance as much as possible and reuse the site to the greatest extent that we can, and providing upgrades in order to beautify it and make it a nice place to spend an afternoon on your computer doing homework. A part of the CUP, we had to provide a TIA, as was mentioned, because of the more than 100 trips in the peak hour. So the assumptions in the TIA were discussed with the VDOT and staff, and that TIA has been reviewed by VDOT, and we have found that there's no major impacts to any of the traffic movements. And actually, all the traffic movements in and out of the site have dedicated turn lanes. So there's really no major impacts. And I'm here if y'all have any more questions about our application.
Mr. Bolster?
I have kind of a geeky technical question on your TIA.
Okay.
It looked like when you did your analysis, for the period of time of almost 1 year, you only assumed a 1% increase in the traffic. And apparently everybody agreed to that. Why only 1% that you measured?
So I am more of a stormwater engineer. Our traffic engineer is not actually here today, but that is a standard assumption that I believe that VDOT recommends that. Calling inaudible. Yes.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I did get on a Teams call with the VDOT team, and I think Omar was on your
Right,
team, and they went through line by line and talked about each aspect of it. I'd be happy to follow up with both of them and get
Just
you
for
something.
future, I mean,
For sure,
because,
yeah.
you know, for the time frame you looked at, which is only 1 year that you measured, you assumed a 1% increase. And that seems to me to be an assumption, given the traffic level that we know we're going to see on there. And I know that there's a short time span maybe for your Starbucks, but that just seemed awfully low for it. So yes, that's more of a geek question for me.
Got it.
Thank you.
I have a question. On this picture, it looks like the entrance isn't going to be from Richmond Road.
That's correct. The entrance is from the Norge Shopping Center itself.
Okay.
So no traffic is coming in off Richmond Road.
Okay.
Where's the patio going to be on the back side?
So the patio won't be visible from Richmond Road. It's going to be at the front of the building, which is by the Tractor Supply.
I'm just glad to see somebody reuse that building and bring us some more energy and jobs and people, because there's nothing in Norge that that we can't use.
Starbucks is very excited about the development.
I am too, I'm great, because it's my district.
Do you anticipate that the cars queuing up for the drive-through that there's enough space on the parcel itself, or do they anticipate there'll be overflow out onto the entry roads going into there?
So I believe we have 12 or 13 car stack, and that is adequate for a location in this area. They've also done a lot of research, another sort of dorky thing, about where they put the menu board, which you'll see is at the 7th car, and Starbucks has determined that minimizes patrons' time at the window. I guess that's the exact amount of time it takes to make a Frappuccino and heat up one of those fancy egg sandwiches. And so once you're at the window, you hand your card, you scan it, and then your food is delivered right to you. So it makes the drive-through experience very efficient.
Is that geeky enough, Mr. Polster?
Yeah, that was a good one. Especially with the one over on, I'm sorry, let me not distract.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Ms. Sweeney.
Thank you all.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on this application? Seeing and hearing none, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion or a recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I propose that we pass the special use permit 22-0025 for 7504 Richmond Road, Starbucks. With conditions.
Thank you. So there's a motion to recommend approval with conditions.
Mr. Crowe?
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. Rose?
Aye.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Thank you, motion carries.
Thank you very much. So, concludes all of our public hearings for the evening, and we are on to Planning Commission considerations, of which we have none. So, Mr. Holt, the Planning Director's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Nothing too much additional to add. We've got a lot of really nice accomplishments and things we were able to finish as of 22. You'll see those listed in the Planning Director's report. Since Mr. Polster started it, being likewise a geek when it comes to all things planning and transportation related, learned just this morning, you all will be maybe glad to know or not, that as of the end of 22, for all of Hampton roads, the normal traffic levels, especially as they relate to AM and PM peak hours, have now fully returned to pre-pandemic levels. You know, there was a long time there. Early on, it was a lot more obvious, but the traffic levels over the last couple of years really dropped off. Still had a lot of people working from home, working remotely, folks who had not yet re-entered the workforce for various reasons. But by the time we hit 22, we're back to being normal. We are going to follow back up with you, of course, for the 1%. I will tell you, though, I don't think that's necessarily and arbitrarily too low of a number. Every roadway segment is different. A lot of it is based on sort of a rolling average of the previous years. You know, again, anytime when you start to look at traffic from, 21, 20, some of that, all the numbers are just so skewed. It's just really thrown everybody off. You know, when we looked at some of the other roadway segments further, I guess, west or north, like when we were looking at some of the traffic studies for, say, Stonehouse, for example, I know it didn't get above 2. And again, it's just VDOT and the traffic engineers go back, look at historic levels, look at changes from year to year. And for this particular segment, interestingly enough, we actually do have a lot of roadways in the county that aren't seeing more than a little over 1% growth per year. But we'll get you a more regular, more complete answer on that one.
My perspective was when we looked at the Hill Pleasant Farm EO, and then we were looking at the intersections of the VDOT reports at Croker Road and Lightfoot. and the traffic there. And so to Rob's point is that turn that they're making into that is just short of that Croker intersection. And the numbers and the number of accidents up there are up. And so I'm going, okay, for a 1 year period, you're going to assume a 1%. You're going to be there for 10 years. And we already know what the traffic volume is on Richmond Road from Lightfoot to Croker Road, especially going west on that, which is where the turns are for it. And the left-hand turn to come when you're going east, it's the same thing. And that's why I brought it up. And if that's what we're looking at, that's fine. And everybody agreed to that. I mean, that was clear in the TIA, but it just seemed low.
Sometimes it can get quirky. Sometimes they look at roadway segments versus interchanges,
Right.
which are very different. And again, we'll get you a more thorough response. I don't know to the degree to which, too, the fact that this is a median divided section of Richmond Road impacts it versus, say, some of the areas further east where it's, you've got that 5th lane,
There's also 2 entrances into there too.
the
Because
shopping
you can
center.
turn right there at the church and then go in, and then you can turn right at the auto place.
Last point on this thing, and we went through this when we did the Wawa on Lightfoot.
Yeah.
And Tim's concern about in and out. And that is a mess.
That's awful. Because people turn left illegally every day.
From a big picture point of view for that shopping center, a lot of it is not all the way developed yet. As part of the widening of Croker Road, the shopping center owner always had plans to build an entrance going out to Croker Road. And so he's not going to do that, obviously, while everything's torn up for the next couple of years, but sort of shortly after that's completed, I would imagine that entrance would be installed by the shopping center owner. There is an approved site plan for that entrance. And so, to the degree, for whatever it's worth, that at some point that would allow folks to bypass that intersection. Let's say you want to go to the library after you grab your Starbucks. You wouldn't necessarily then have to go out onto Richmond Road for whatever it's worth.
But the challenge, sorry, just because I'll forget, Jack. The challenge is going to be much the same that we see at that Wawa. And I would hope that VDOT would reconsider that flashing yellow, because that is a disaster waiting to happen. I've already seen a number of traffic accidents there because people are trying to go across a divided highway, across 2 lanes of traffic, and we're going to further compound that because folks are going to now make a U-turn to head back to the entrance by O'Reilly's to get into Starbucks. So if you're eastbound 60, you're going to be making a U-turn or a left-hand turn, and nobody's doing 45. So I would hope if there's the opportunity for that to be addressed with VDOT, that they will pay close attention to that.
Give it a little bit of time. I have a feeling you're talking about the signal there heading
At Norwich
down.
Lane.
Yep. Give that another maybe year. I have a feeling that's going to get redone because one of the other projects that's ongoing, so much of that part of the world is under construction, it's hard to keep it all straight. So the widening of Croker Road is a separate project in and of itself. Coming from the intersection of Croker Road and Richmond Road back into town, really across all of these out parcels, including, should the board approve it, including the Starbucks, including the O'Reillys, is a new sidewalk that will bring you all the way down. And then in order to cross over Richmond Road to get to where the other church is, where that existing sidewalk is, there are going to be a lot of intersection improvements for crosswalks with actually sidewalk improvements across that median because there's a lot of elevation change and the drainage ditch. So that project is ready to enter into the construction phase. And so that intersection, and thus necessarily the signal timings and the light heads and the addition of ped heads to allow for the safe crossing of pedestrians there, all of that's about to get redone.
Okay, good to know.
And hopefully improved.
Thanks.
That's the goal.
Sorry, Jack.
You mentioned that traffic volume for all of Hampton roads has returned to normal. Does that mean Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure some places are better than others, but does that mean that the traffic count would be the same as it was in 2019? Or very similar?
No, I'm sure it kind of goes back to methodologically, is that a word? What would you, well, I guess, but for the pandemic, what you would have otherwise assumed
So
it to
would
be
account for population growth is my question.
should,
Yeah.
because again, but for that dip, if you were to otherwise keep it what it normally would have continued to be, we're back to normal. There's some interesting sort of statistics on some of that. I'm happy to share that PowerPoint presentation with you. Not unexpectedly, sort of the biggest development within Hampton Roads that doesn't necessarily impact us here in James City County has just been the tremendous growth at the ports. For whatever reason, probably for lots of discrete reasons, the Port of Virginia has just really taken off and done at a record pace, some record-breaking volumes, and has really sort of come online.
So a lot of the traffic then would be port truck traffic as opposed
Yeah,
to?
and that's traditionally, I mean, some of that's gonna come up 64 directly, but that is gonna hit a lot of your distribution centers, which, while we have some, the bulk of those are really gonna be in Chesapeake and Suffolk, sort of out the 460 corridor more so.
What's behind my question is, there's been a lot written in the last 6 months about the work from home phenomenon, and study this sort of, I think that a big portion of it is, that was always my question. We had this big rise in work from home during COVID, but would that dissipate after COVID went away and people started returning to the office? And people have started to return to the office, but not all of them. And there is still a fairly large number of people who are working from home and who can work anywhere. And they're leaving the major, expensive, congested metropolitan areas such as Washington, D.C. and New York City and San Francisco, and they're moving Boise, Idaho, and Utah, and I risk of some acceleration in population growth from refugees. And if a lot of the traffic that has returned to normal includes acceleration in port truck traffic, that would imply that residential traffic, car traffic, automobile traffic is still lower than normal, which would...
I don't know. So, it's like everything in life. Find articles, say it both ways, right?
Yeah, sure.
Really sort of the only thing that I can give you that's most up to date for Hampton Roads specifically is the methodology that's traditionally used, both traditionally used and formally adopted at the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning organizational level for the socioeconomic model for all of Hampton Roads. And usually that's done at the beginning of each update to the long-range transportation plan. And so you all remember we used the 2045 LRTP employment and population data as the basis for some of our long-range planning. And again, why I like that is because one, it's done using our local values, using what their economist is seeing specific to here in Virginia, and is even more refined because it is specific to future growth trends specific to the largest employment sectors that are physically in Hampton Roads. And for the 2050 model update, so if anywhere some of that would translate into some projections in terms of the work for home, it's probably where that would start to show itself more. I will say for the 2050 model, it is looking like the employment numbers for all of Hampton Roads would be much less than previously predicted, and as such, the population growth would be much less. It's all relative, but the numbers are looking to be much lower. So to me, it doesn't, because the numbers are objectively lower, at least as forecast, doesn't imply necessarily to me that there's a shift from one location to the other sort of within the metro area. That would sort of imply maybe more of a netting out of the numbers. It doesn't show the population growth necessarily increasing while formal employment's decreasing. So I don't know that we're sort of getting those remote workers as residents. I would think some of that would show up, but both are looking to be a whole lot lower than was forecast in 2045. So it just tells me that, maybe it goes back to the interest rate. Just everything is just sort of slowing down. And some of that previous historical growth is not really expected anymore at this point.
I think our challenge remains, though, just anecdotally, it's all the traffic heading to the beach, and I can tell you that the volume of trucks on the road is significantly more than it was 4 years ago. I know you'll lament.
By on the road, you mean I-64 specifically?
64, yeah. I mean, it's, it is constant. 64 is bumper to bumper constant between Lightfoot and the way station at, in Henrico County there. So it's just significant, and the number of accidents on that roadway is appears to be up. It's just it's amazing to see how full those roads are and how they remain full constantly. Especially, to me, it's more congested on 64 than prior to the pandemic. So, but we also put in two.
That catch up though from basically from the pandemic where supply is moving and now everyone's trying to catch back up at this point.
And the Port of Portsmouth recently installed 2 new cranes. So there are 2 larger cranes that can now accommodate larger cargo ships and can move more quickly. So, I think that's probably a big rise in that increase in the Port of Portsmouth.
Socioeconomic data. One of the things that I found about that, and I'd like to, if the 250 is there, I'd like to take a look at it. But when we use it for the comp plan, what I found so interesting about that data for James City County, and you've been working to improve the fidelity of that data for a number of years, and you could see it in the last 2045. But what would be interesting to see is all the upper county areas where the projected growth was for that 120,000. But you also saw not only workers, but employments and types in there with percentages of increase. So it would be easy to spot what they're projecting by just looking at those aggregate figures for those pieces of the county. So are the 250
So I don't know that we have those yet specific to the TAS, specific TASs. I will say, though, right now I think it is just at the, as far as I know, is at the county level. But with that said, to the degree that employment and population growth at some level is a function of the greater market and is sort of some point relative to what all of Hampton Roads is doing, and yes, that is slowing, I absolutely want the PC and board to recognize that a component of that forecast includes local land use policy. And so at some level, I can't tell you what number, can't tell you what some percent is, the impact of that last adopted comp plan and the impact of some of those land use policy changes is going to have a material impact on our lower numbers, lower population numbers for sure.
The last point I made, and I had this conversation with Jack recently, is if you look at New Kent County, it is now the #1 growth county in Virginia. Second now. And then it had a 36% increase in population over the 210. And that makes sense if you think about the commute distances and how people, what Jack is trying to get at, is easier to find an affordable house, a commute that you can get up I-64 with, to work in the Richmond area or down below. I mean, so, you know.
Gonna have a wider I-64 to do it in another couple of years.
Right, and so I think it's worthwhile looking at that we're gonna see this kind of a growth and then watching the figures on it. The last point I wanted to make was, if you go back maybe 5-8 years ago, the whole port of Norfolk was generated based on the widening of the Panama Canal. And then the second thing they did is the CSX guys have been renovating all of their tunnels across into the Midwest. And so instead of having products come trucked in or trained in from the West Coast, it's easier now to get through the canal and get to Norfolk, and then you can train the stuff. And so the train line actually runs at Chesapeake all the way out the 460 way. And so you've seen those double stacked cars. Well, they'll now be able to get through the West Virginia tunnels with that. So that's a lot of the growth we're going to see, hopefully, stays off of I-64.
Well, and certainly the third leg of that, as alluded to earlier with some of the investments in the new cranes. As far as I know, the funding to deepen that channel, it's either to 50 or 55 feet, is also to accommodate the larger Panamax ships, which we're not able to currently do, which, again, continues to put us at the state, from an economic point of view, at a competitive advantage towards usually what are typically the number 1 and 2 on the East Coast, which is New York. And
money for that got done out of this infrastructure bill.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I started all of that.
No, I think it was a great discussion. Thank you. So,
I do have one discussion point that I wanted to follow up, that I said that we talk maybe a little bit about the sunset clause on that. If you all have a chance yet to take a look at my notes for the board's meeting on the 10th for it, you'll see a paragraph in there on the Hicks Island piece. And what I said was still an issue for some commissioners is that the approval of a short-term rental SUP conveys the parcel in perpetuity, and they would prefer that the SUP sunset when the parcel changed ownership. And so that's a statement I put in there for the Hicks piece. I think it's representative, at least. So, I mean, I'm going to get a chance to say that at the board meeting on the 10th, and it'll be in the minutes from here.
It'll be in the minutes, and I made a little note to myself. So, over these next couple of meetings, there will be some zoning ordinance based on the work of the policy committee to date. There will be some work to have some zoning ordinance amendment check-in points with the board. We've typically done that from time to time. We're going to try to get one of those scheduled for later on this month. But just a reminder for the commission, I need to go back and check the date, but typically it's in the spring, maybe late spring, where we have our annual joint meeting of the Planning Commission and Board. And so, for tentative potential possible topics, I made a note to myself for these couple of items, because, we're always looking for items that may serve well to be an item on the agenda for that full joint meeting.
That's a good question.
I'm sorry, Steve. I'll take on the task with Frank's input and share it with you all, of just sort of maybe outlining what we're thinking, and just so we can make sure we capture everybody's input, so we can share that with the board at some point. So, it's, I think everybody's been through the training. So, I think I won't speak for Mr. Kinsman, but I think his interpretation is that because we're a Dillon rule state and the state code does not say we can do sunset clauses, I think that's his, in simplest terms, that's where he's deriving his opinion, as opposed to other localities or saying because the state's silent that it gives them that ability to do that. So, Ms. Parman, you can warn Mr. Kinsman that's coming his way again.
Your points are well taken. I've taken a lot of notes.
So, Mr. Rogers?
I was just trying to be clear in my own mind. I don't have it in front of me. When I saw Frank's email, it said some of the commissioners, right? Isn't that the word? Is it? I don't know. I'm putting him on the spot. Isn't that all of us?
I don't want to speak for everybody, and all of us have different opinions about this depending on what it is. It's just a concern that I think we voiced about that. And I think we're looking for somebody to kind of, what can we do about it? And that's up to the board to kind of give us the guidance of where they want to go after we express it.
Any other, Dr. Rose?
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask a question about the policy committee report. I'm curious about this sentence, some such facilities are reportedly being used by groups and teams not affiliated with the neighborhood, and as such might cause excess traffic, noise, lighting, and other unwelcome effects. That gives me pause the way this is written.
I wrote it, so I'm on this.
I guess my question is, what is happening here? What are those unwelcome effects? Because from an outsider reading, it sounds like there's communities that don't have resources, like playgrounds and baseball fields, and they're coming to use these. And the people who live there say, I don't want people coming
That's
to my
what we
neighborhood.
needed more clarification on.
Which is why all the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, all the questions down below, because we weren't sure about
Okay.
about what was the exact nature of the problem. Okay. Is it a real problem? I spoke with my former HOA president about it, and
I did too.
Frank did as well, trying to. So, I could table your question. We're gonna.
Okay,
We're gonna
I'd love to hear more about that.
Because I'm not sure where it came from. But the basic concern is that there's an HOA that has tennis courts, and then outside group comes live in that neighborhood, can't use them. Controls that, does the HOA give the outside group permission to come in or
You
not?
can't just walk into any neighborhood.
Well,
like,
I
a lot of them
don't know
are
whether you
gated.
can or you can't.
I,
but
I
know
can give you anecdotal information in the neighborhoods where I lived, where there were a number of recent, all for benign purposes, but like a pickleball tournament gets organized to benefit a nonprofit, and somebody agrees to it, but before everyone else is really aware of it, there's a whole schedule, and pickleball's pretty darn popular.
Yeah.
So if you have a tennis court and it's got a pickleball court painted on top, and all of a sudden there's a big schematic, and there's a weekend full of people split between three otherwise quiet neighborhoods, I believe that's where it's coming from.
That's why the questions.
Pickleball.
Yeah, okay.
We don't do
It's not tennis,
anything
it's
like that
pickleball.
at Colonial Heritage, and it's huge. If you come to speak or something, you can give a speech, but you can't sell your books, that kind of thing. But I have never heard, and I've been there 5 years and I'm on the architectural committee, I haven't heard anything happening like that.
It doesn't happen in my,
Yeah, so I have
That
no
doesn't
idea
mean it's not happening
where this
somewhere.
is coming from at all, but,
Why the questions?
yeah. Now, I know in Charlottesville, the gym I belong to allowed the swimming teams from all the schools to use the lanes certain times of the week. And nobody really cared about that either. I mean, somebody had to bring it up sometime.
stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned, yeah, okay.
We use a pool, we're members of the pool in Queens Lake, even though we don't live in Queens Lake. Maybe they're speaking about us. My wife.
Paying.
That's your county, that's not my problem.
Anything else for Mr. Holt on the planning director's report? Or I guess we kind of went into discussion and requests, so if nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Who's doing the report next month? I thought it was me. For some-
For January, it's Mr. Polster. He
Good.
has January 10th, and I did not look to see who had
January 10th, I
February.
think I'm February. Okay.
So,
I'll look it up again.
okay, so,
I'll always send an email. I just only
Send me an
memorize
email.
the next thing instead of more
Okay.
right now.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I move we adjourn.
so, there's a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank
Thank
you.
you.